So this breakout session is about capacity of CSOs, the third main objective of the guidelines. I am Dario Di Benedetto. I'm a task manager at the EU office in Kosovo. I'm in charge of the EU support to civil society. I've been working in Kosovo for almost 7 years. Before then, I was working in Brussels in the unit for regional programs, and I was also following civil society and media. So I was also involved in the preparation of the first set of guidelines for the period 14-20. And I could see also how this document evolved over years. And so the path that it took to arrive to these results that we have today. And so about this objective 3, I think the discussion we had during the plenary was already introducing the topic. There were already interesting comments from Taulant and from other colleagues. So what we are going to do now is to see how this tool, in particular the indicators of objective 3, could be utilized in the future in each country, in each context, to in a way motivate or give directions to civil society, to governments, in order to improve the situation of civil society. I would like to also to share with you my thoughts about the indicators for related to capacities. I partly share some of the comments that I've heard today about the fact that some indicators are not, let's say, relevant for small organizations, for grassroots organizations that are designed around a certain idea of civil society organization, and that are also very much about compliance with certain standards rather than focusing on performance. But I also share the same point discussed about the fact that these guidelines, these indicators should be seen as a sort of route, as a sort of direction that is proposed, should be seen as an inspirational document for both civil society, media, civil society, sorry, and government, rather than rocket science or something cast in stones. I think it was clearly mentioned that there will be an initial assessment to draw a baseline of the situation in each country, and of course it also this implies that this route, this direction can also change, can be improved. But it's important to have some sort of milestones at the beginning of this path that would give us the route and the sort of compass to go in that direction. How we can proceed? I think we can open the floor to questions or points that you want to raise, you want to discuss, and we will collect all the inputs that will be raised during this hour together, and then this will feed into the modification, the changes, and the final report of the event, and then of course will be food for thoughts for the revision and for the initial assessment of the first assessment of the guidelines. I can say that looking at I don't know if you went through the guidelines, but I did last night scrutinize a bit the document, and I have to admit that some of the indicators are quite are measuring clearly performance. Some relate to public perception of civil society, and I think this is very powerful, because it gives a measure of how civil society is perceived in the society, how the impact of civil society work is delivers in terms of visibility. Some other are more compliance type of indicators, like presence of certain policy or certain a certain number of employee or certain type of employee, which, again, are certain are an indicator of compliance. So that doesn't give an indication of a measurement of performance. It just says that certain number of NGOs have a policy in place. So there are, of course, there is a sort of balance between performance and compliance in these guidelines. And that's a bit one of the aspects that I find, where I find this a sort of criticism. But again, this is not rocket science. We cannot have the perfect solution at this stage. But yeah, I would like to hear from you, and so the floor is open to comments, to the discussion, and please try to be to come forth and express your views freely. There is no a good or a bad opinion on, or a good or bad vision of the point that you can raise. So please feel free to express your consideration and your points in this context. So who wants to break the ice? Kosovo, please. Our resource center.
Thank you, Dario. I'm really happy to see that this process is concluding and that actually EU remains one of the most serious and consistent supporters for an enabling environment. This is what really differentiates EU compared to other donors. Regarding the guidelines, I had the chance to look at the indicators quickly, and I will try to provide few ideas and arguments that I think illustrates the entire approach on developing the guidelines. But since we are supposed to talk for the chapter 3, capacities of CSOs, I will be focused here. EU in general, but also other donors increasingly are showing interest to support other groups rather than non-governmental NGOs or registered entities, which includes other non-formal groups, individual activists, etc. That's one of the reasons why for many years now, almost everyone is referring to civil society organizations as CSOs rather than NGOs or MPOs. To this end, the guidelines is not inclusive for other types of NGOs, of civil society groups and organizations. And if I could just illustrate with few examples. And then later I will also provide some recommendations on what we could do to, in a way, mitigate this, the existing toolkit that we have, and implement and start implementing it. For example, a proportion of CSOs that have an organizational gender equality policy. That could be a very good indicator and apply to well-established NGOs, but if we speak about groups, informal groups, then do they really need to have a policy, a written policy? Probably the definition of the indicators will provide more information on what do we mean by policy, because a policy could be also a few lines that indicates the intent and the approach of the group rather than something very comprehensive. But I think this should be considered. Then the other one, as Dario was mentioning, the indicators are look at CSOs more from the compliance perspective, and that then lacks the quality of what's actually happening. And one of the other examples that I've chosen here is the proportion of CSOs that have specialized communication staff. I could, with a quite high confidence, say that in Kosovo, only few CSOs have a specialized PR staff. That's not an easy task to do. It costs, and it's really difficult to have one. The other indicator, also trying to show a case here, a trend, proportion of CSOs that cooperate with media. We all believe that working closely with media is a positive thing, and we should aim for that. But then the context on where we operate tells us quite a different story. For example, in Kosovo, it's really difficult to get access to media if you don't pay them in advance, be that a presentation of a report or just attending a radio show. So the media business has becoming very commercialized and not accessible for the majority of CSOs. Now, if we gather information from CSOs through a survey, and then the initial findings are that CSOs do not cooperate with media, is this really telling us something without actually knowing the root cause of why is this not happening? And the last one that I would want to share here with you is indicator 3.3b, proportion of CSOs that publish information on their sources of funding and amounts received in the previous year. So my concern here is with the source of funding, especially in the region where we live in. It could be quite easily that governments shifting towards more authoritarian approaches on governance. If someone wants to raise funds through crowdfunding, then this could be a really problematic indicator, because first we are asking, we are telling that a CSO is a good one, is showing a high capacities and transparency if they are making their sources of finance, of financial sources available to the public. But then if I really want to support a public cause, but I'm threatened by government or anyone else, and I don't want to be identified, that should be also considered as a case. Otherwise, in the moments where the democracy is in question, this could be rather problematic. As a recommendation for few of the indicators, if possible, I would say that we should have two categories. What indicators apply to a well-established and registered NGOs, those that are well-structured, and others that do not apply to NGOs, but to other groups and non-formal groups. This would allow us to come up with findings and recommendations that are inclusive and take into account other types of civil society organizing approaches and forms into countries where we live in. Thanks, and sorry if I was a bit long.
Thank you very much, Dren. I think you raise a very important points. And I can, and thanks for the proposal. There are, concrete recommendations on how to address some of those. I think this could be, we will of course hear to other colleagues, but already I think that we can say that perhaps what is very much needed is a sort of methodological note that would clarify in details what indicators is measuring, reveal what is the assumption behind the indicator, because most of these indicators are based on assumption that by fulfilling such criteria, then civil society will be more effective and more transparent and accountable, etc. So it's important that each indicators is more explicit in terms of what it's meant to measure and how it will be measured. And there I share with you the point on dividing sort of indicators for organizations that have a structure, have a established and are registered and have established practices, and also indicators that are targeting informal groups and non-registered entities. And we all know how heterogeneous is civil society by definition. There is no one civil society. Each of us has probably a different perception and idea of what civil society is actually. So it's important that we have a common understanding on that. There is a sentence at the beginning of the document which clarifies what the European Union intends as civil society, what the type of entity that the EU wants to engage with. But of course, the EU wants to engage with all civic actors, being those registered, informal or formal. Of course, it is more difficult to engage with informal small groups than with organizations that are better structured from the point of view of the institutions. Yeah, but an important point, an important indicator, I think, is that the one related to putting people at the center of civil society work. And this is an indicator which is drawn from the global standards for accountability. And I think this is very, very relevant, being this a structured or not structured organization. Any comment, please? Please tell your name. So this
Adriatica Santari from Roma Active Albania.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to also comment, discuss, and also be here for the guidelines, in particular to Taxo for making this happening, but also to the guys which are always behind there and making sure that these things are really happening. The first question I have is a very naive question, because usually when we apply for projects, we're asked to be concise, very concise, and not to have a lot of specific objectives. This one has 8 specific objectives. So already, if we have someone from the ROM mission here, that would really make a lot of troubles in endorsing it. And on the other hand, you have 23 indicators. And most of them you say that it's very good that they refer to the global standards for CSO accountability, which is good at one side. But when we talk about informality, we don't need to have in mind only the groups that are informal, that are not registered. We also need to have in mind those organizations that are small, that they work in a local level, that they work with the communities. And if you apply these guidelines to them, they will not exist anymore in the next year. So regardless how much small grants or support we give to them, because if this will be the Bible to endorse them and to approach them to uphold this set of guidelines, it would just not be possible. And I'm talking here for the NGOs that comes from the most vulnerable groups, that there is a lot of need for capacity. And capacity, on the other hand, it's not a one-side approach or one-side milestone. It has something that has to continue forever, because also civic society, it's also very dynamic. It's very well described in the beginning, dynamic, diverse, resilient, and so on. So, and that element needs to remain there as well. On the other hand, what I see also from the support of the Commission in particular, Commission likes a lot this international organization, which obviously they also get a lot of financial support to also endorse and support the capacity building of the organization in the region. And on the other hand, the Commission is supporting CSO sector in the last 25 years, maybe 20 years. More? 30. In the region.
The region is for sure for the last 3 financial frameworks, so it's 21 years.
So what in that, I mean, there is a lot of capacity out there already created. So why, I mean, I never understand, but that's to be debated, on why Commission is often engaged very strongly and bilaterally with intergovernmental organizations that are not ready yet to uphold and recognize the capacity of civic society that is in the region, which obviously it is already existing. And to end my comment, it's still the guidelines. I'm very happy that they are there, but we need to perhaps also see them, not only look at them from 2021, 2027, but we also have to see the mid-review, if that is possible, on what has been applicable and what not. And perhaps it was also asked in the plenary how that monitoring would happen. Why not having these guidelines ROM'd? I mean, this ROM mission, they goes very deep. They ask a lot of elements. They look at the efficiency, they look at the number of the shoes, the number of everything. So why not having these guidelines ROM'd to see what it has to be changed or what it needs to be changed, to have that very in-depth monitoring on it, which is very different from the kind of standards you or what you propose you want to see on the national, on the country yearly reports, which we also see the Commission is also seeing the development of civil society there with some sentences. And I will stop here. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. A lot of you are adding a lot of points to the discussion, and I'm not able to to respond to all of them, but I would say that I share all of them, and particularly the one related to the midterm review and to the methodology of the monitoring of these guidelines. Certainly, midterm review is necessary, but I would say not even a midterm. After the first measurement, I think we will need to revise these indicators and see if they are actually measuring what they are supposed to measure. And if not, then we need, of course, to act and change. But let me just perhaps clarify one thing. When you say the role of international organization is another point. But the fact that the Commission has in mind a big organization, big NGOs, of course, you have to imagine that the standards, the global standards that are now used as a reference for these indicators have been developed by CSOs for CSOs. Now, these are networks of organization. BSDN is represented here by different colleagues in this room, and they are big NGOs, I agree. But they are, in a way, advocating for civil society developments in the region. Now, of course, the mechanism of representation there is perhaps perfectible. It's not ideal, but of course, we need to interface with actors that are somehow representing different contexts. Networks are the best type of actors in this case. But regarding international organization, yeah, that's a point that we usually discuss in each country. I think that there is an ongoing debate about the role of international organization versus role of big NGOs with capacities in the region. I think that the role is different. International organizations are also, in a way, supported by member states. So there is this aspect within the particular UN organization, and then there are other points related to their engagement, mostly related to their experience global in the global sphere, their global goals that are somehow linked to the objective of the specific project. But I would say that in general there is no competition in terms of funds between CSOs and UN or other international organizations. If you look at the civil society facility, this is not is implemented for and by CSOs. It's not there are no funds that goes from these instruments to the international organization. Then, of course, we can discuss more on that. Specific on specific areas like gender equality or local development, and you can argue that some organizations in the region have a strong experience, but this is not in any case not limiting the EU relations with CSOs and the EU funding to CSOs. Evaluation, ROM, sorry, just to complete, of course, this is the evaluation of the assistance and of the guidance will be done, will be as was done previously for the previous period. So I think similarly will be done also in these 7 years, and for sure, as I mentioned, the midterm review will be crucial. So, point taken. What's next?
Hi, thanks. Adrian from the YMCA in Kosovo, but of course, YMCA across the world, but I won't talk for the world. Some good points raised. I think just some thoughts that I have, not necessarily questions, is from our experience, COVID has wiped out quite a few of our organizations, quite a few of our programs, quite a few of our good assembly members, good board members. You know, we are taking a kind of a health check on where we are. We've had to sell properties globally. We've lost excellent minds to other competitors or businesses. And, you know, we were close to losing the YMCA presence in some countries, especially in the Balkans and Eastern Europe. So I think I don't see, and I've not heard today, I was a bit surprised this morning, kind of a retake of kind of where we are now, opposed to maybe the beginning of the process. And I see a lot of these indicators, they are also kind of, you know, some of them are easy ticked off if you want to tick them off. And I guess that's what organizations will be looking at. But others need to be woven into the life of organizations. It's not just about having a strategy, it's about having a strategy that follows a strategy that follows a strategy. It's not about having a vision, it's about having a committee and a revisioning process. And once you've hit your goals, do you have new goals? Do you have new mission? And I think we could be excused here just to try and tick some of these things off and say, okay, you need a gender equality policy. I can Google that. We can implement that. We can send it to the committee. It's done. And then some of them are like massive in terms of like, you know, creating, you know, a diversification of funding. Like you just say that next to like making a policy. I think they're completely different things, completely different fields of expertise. And I appreciate big is relative, but I would consider us a big organization. Some of these things would be difficult. And I also think, again, COVID has taught us many lessons, but just because you're in a good position today does not mean that they cannot revert backwards on some of these standards or indicators. Just because you tick the box today does not mean 12 months time you'll be in the same position. So it's just some thoughts. But I think in general, it's a good set of things that big organizations should be aiming for. I don't see anything here that's kind of not normal. That's all. Thanks.
Valentina, MCIC, responsible for the National Research Center in Macedonia. I fully agree with you ticking the box. Yes, there is a huge difference having a strategy and implementing the strategy. And it goes with everything else, with all the documents, internal documents. Now, concerning your proposal, definitely when monitoring, there must be a difference for each of the indicators, whether it refers to only registered CSOs in line with a specific law, like in our country, it's the law on employment associations, and some indicators overall for all the other types of organizations. That needs to be specified in the methodology, for sure. I agree, although there are 8 specific objectives. I looked through them, and I was also involved in the previous EU guidelines. I could not take any of those. They are needed for the organizations, really. If we want to have strong civil society that wants to be a partner to the government, that can critique the government to be transparent for a good governance, you have to be transparent. I mean, the organizations have to be transparent. If we want to be visible, if we want public trust, the public needs to trust the organization. They need to know that they have organizations that are really accountable. I mean, they hear the voice of the people. So I would not take any of these objectives, but of course, with respect to the indicators, it needs to be really clear what is really measured. Now, I know that there was also a question how we can help in distributing, I mean, in making sure that these are implemented, and I see a big role of the resource centers. That's why I'm in this group, having in mind that the resource centers will continue in all the countries. They should take the role, and this will be discussed tomorrow at the meeting, but I would like to emphasize in each of the research centers, there are capacity building programs. This should be strongly taken, not only within the capacity building programs, but also in any of the events always more or less to point out, hey, there are some EU guidelines which also pay attention to the capacity building. Just have that in mind. Something that we should not forget as a resource center.
Thank you, Valentina. Next.
Should I continue? Thanks. So Emilia Dimasca from the Clina Foundation. Actually, I have comments on very much on some of the same indicators that my colleagues mentioned, especially on 3.1D in relation to gender, like organizations with gender equality policy. From a perspective of an organization constantly advocating for promotion of gender equality, I think this is quite ambitious and practically impossible. Yes, proportion of CSOs that have an organizational gender equality policy. Absolutely, you can have it and not implement it, as few of my colleagues have already mentioned. I think, I mean, we should have like the basic point that many of the organizations, no matter the area they are active in, do know very little about gender. So I think it would be key to provide capacity building to organizations to mainstream gender in their work. And that would be some sort of a starting indicator for me, like to see which organizations have and how they have mainstream gender into their general work. When it comes to 3.2B, sorry, a proportion of CSOs that have specialized communication staff, it seems like another very ambitious indicator given the limited, very limited resources and capacities of, especially of small civil society organizations. And this is perhaps another area where I would like to see maybe more capacity development to organizations in that. Sorry, I will jump back to 3.2A as well when it comes to proportion of CSOs that have at least one online channel of communication. And my comment here would be that it's extremely important to consider the security perspective, because there are organizations with one or more than one channel of communication facing severe attacks, specifically from the anti-gender movement, which has been the case in Macedonia, but also in the region. So I think it's very, very important to consider risks and security for organizations and human rights defenders. Another comment refers to 3.6A, which is CSOs taking part in local, central, and international CSOs networks. Here, I mean, we could speak about number of CSOs taking part in different networks. But for me, the key question is like, what is their influence or the impact they're making through those networks, really? So, I mean, I would really like to see that, you know, their influence is being measured through these specific indicators instead. And the final one refers to 3.7.1, diversified funding. My colleagues have already mentioned several things about that. I mean, we could speak here about the conditions for fundraising of civil society organizations and so on. So it's another ambitious indicator, and maybe like, I would like, at the beginning, I would like to see success examples of organizations who are diversifying funding rather than proportion of organization as such. And final comment, since we're speaking about CSO's capacities, it's my comment about the networking, the space for networking of civil society organizations. At least Clina is working with the method of networking, and this has proven very successful. I'm not speaking about space for capacity building, but really a space for organizations to come together, to reflect on specific challenges, obstacles, positive examples, lessons learned, and so on, and space for sharing experiences and learning together. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for these very valuable comments. I would simply, I mean, I share fully your comments. I think it's are all very relevant. Let me just add that one of the most difficult thing of indicators when we're talking about social sciences or objects which are not easily identifiable in terms of not easy, or variables which are not easy to isolate, is the complexity to measure them. So the methodology, so is it, of course, I fully agree that we don't have to tick boxes, but we need to measure implementation, real things, how gender is implemented, the gender policies are implemented, not if they are present or no in the organization. But all these is an additional weight on the methodology. How would you measure this? How much would that cost? Would that really possible to measure this in each country? Probably yes, but this would have a huge impact on, will be feasible actually. So what the exercise that was done by our taxo expert and by all of us in the last years was to identify, of course, the object to be measured, and try to find, in a way, the most simple one in terms of indicators, the easiest way to measure some of these important aspects related to capacities. But of course, this of course cuts away a lot of important information like real performance of CSOs. I agree that ideally we should focus on a real impact of the work of civil society in each country. So in these regards, we should perhaps look at proxy indicators. So how society is changing through the activities and action implemented by CSO. So to measure other things such as, I don't know, sense of community, self-efficacy of communities, the level of democratic participation in a certain country. So this type of in measurements are very costly, and of course are subject to a lot of other influence from other aspects, like first of all the political context. So it's difficult also to isolate these variables and determine that this change is determined by civil society. So this is just to clarify that it's very difficult to focus on performance when it comes to capacities. Another point that I wanted to mention is that this is purely from the angle of the EU delegation and the EU assistance. These guidelines, these indicators are important for us because the assistance that we program every 3 years in consultation with you, I would say 80% of this assistance focuses on capacities. So we need to, of course, identify what out of these indicators will be achieved through this assistance. This is important above all to justify why we are spending this money, or to measure the impact of these investments in the sector. So it's important that there are numerical values that would measure the impact of the impact of the volume of assistance that is delivered in each country. So there is also, I would say, a practical need that these guidelines are addressing in this regard. So this is also we have to keep in mind this element as well. Okay. Yes, of course.
My name is Ozan. I'm from Turkey, the Association of Journalists. And mine's not necessarily really a question, but kind of a commentary in the guise of a question, I guess. So I might like to kind of put that out beforehand. I find it a bit difficult to perceive these standards in the context of Turkey, because I think the context in Turkey is quite intricate, diverse, and it's a vast country, and it's almost like a continent within itself. Yeah, so it's, sorry? I mean, it's quite just very, very diverse, ethnically, religiously, in many, many ways. So when it comes to standards, it always seems like the tension between, you know, universality and relativism, because these some of the standards I find very difficult implementing for all civil society organizations in Turkey. For example, indicator 3.3b, proportion of CSOs that publish information on their sources of funding and amounts received in the previous year. Now that might not be an issue for a CSO that's active in a context that's not too politically charged. But if you're a human rights organization that is conducting work that is really politically charged, or if you're a CSO working in the media field, then your funding sources kind of define your public perception. So that's becomes mutually exclusive with indicator 3.3c, for example, degree of public trust. You could be as transparent as you want, and you could declare all your funding sources, and then people will hate you even more. So there's that issue as well that we need to take into consideration in Turkey. And I think that rather than demonstrating the degree of the intervention being effective, it gives us an idea of the political climate rather than demonstrate change itself, which I think these indicators are put in place to kind of measure or give us an idea of. And just one more thing I wanted to get off my chest. Again, for indicator 3.5a, proportion of CSOs whose work is based on evidence generated through research. I just recently completed my master's dissertation, so I feel like I'm almost qualified to kind of comment on research, but I believe that a lot of the CSOs kind of find what they're looking for rather than actually, you know, discover something within the field that they're carrying out research. And that I think that makes it all too easy to kind of present contracting authorities with data that they'd rather see than rather to observe actual phenomena, because it's a very complex issue, and it requires, you know, a significant degree of expertise. And I think a lot of CSOs in Turkey, no matter how big they are, they would significantly lack the necessary capacity to do this. So I think there is a bit of a kind of universal approach there that might not necessarily fit the Turkish context. But of course, these are all, you know, they can be tweaked and they can apply, but again, it might fall short there a bit. So I didn't ask a question, I just spoke my mind. Thank you.
No, it's a very relevant, both points are very relevant. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, I fully agree that there's a need to fine tune these indicators for each context. We need to calibrate those in each country, in each, in case of Turkey, probably in each region of Turkey. And also on the capacities for research, I agree. Most of the organizations, like also in other countries, are not would need a lot of capacity building in this regard. But again, we have to really think of these indicators as a sort of ideal direction where civil society should aim at. Rather than, we know that there are difficulties at the moment, that of course civil society are not able to comply with these standards, but this is sort of direction where civil society can in the region should we expect should in this direction should develop. And this brings me to the initial question that we had in the agenda. About how civil society can make best use of sort of standards, indicators, and I think there are some of those that can be definitely inspiration for self-determined standards about accountability. I know that in some countries there are some initiatives in this direction. There are some codes of conducts being implemented, and I think this is a good approach. Perhaps these guidelines can contribute to the same initiatives in other countries. But I think in general, this the function of these guidelines is a more sort of inspiration for a sort of compass, as I mentioned, for civil society development. knowing all the limits and all the countries' peculiarities that are not, of course, cannot be summarized in this initial document. But for sure, as mentioned, all these points will be duly taken into account, noted, and I will follow up. We will follow up on the next after the first measurement, or the baseline, if you want. I don't know how to call this. I'm pretty sure that there will be changes in the indicators, and there will be further consultations with you. I think this is an exercise that will be done on an yearly basis. So in probably 1 year time, we'll be again discussing the status of this result framework, and we'll be able also to track the development and see what worked better and what didn't work. So I think we can conclude here. We have a lot of points. My colleague, I'm sure, wrote several pages of notes. So thank you very much. And there are some online comments. And okay. So okay. So thanks a lot, and we will continue with the program in plenary. Thank you.